So it pleases me no end to be invited to speak to you. And it's especially the case that I want to be able to give you a message of hope in this troubled world that President Bailey so rightly and so beautifully writes about. Um, I come to you actually at a time when our world is darker and more troubled than ever. But I want you to know that my very title contains my hope that our work together will, in Tolkien's words, rekindle hope. Rekindle hope in a world that's grown chill. So I will be speaking to you as a teacher of hope, with my hope that this knowledge of the reading brain and dyslexia can help actually heal some of the wounds in our own smaller reading world. I come to you as a teacher with insights that I've learned. Now, I always will have to say this in every talk, and this may be a little bit of a surprise to you who may have very firm convictions about various methods. I won't endorse any method. I don't even endorse my new beloved own method. That's not the point of a research and a researcher who wants to give, if you will, insights from my work that I hope will help every teacher, every single one of you. And I will begin with my slides, but you will see that the first slide I want to emphasize as my hope that these lessons from the reading brain will enhance the lives of our children, all our children. There is never going to be one method for all children. Rather, it is our knowledge as teachers with different knowledge bases to figure out what is right for this child at this age with this profile at this point in their development. All of that, however, is in the service of our common humanity. And that is what I believe will be the ultimate goal of my talk. But I never give a single talk without a couple of premises that I make clear, and absolutely no end of thanks to the people whom I work with. But I want to actually tell you the tiniest story that I told very, very few people, but because so many of you are educators, I want to tell you. The greatest honor I've ever had was to become elected as a member of the Pontifical Academy of Science. And my first trip, I was walking up these marble steps, and they were huge. And there were Titians and Raphael and Tintoretto, all these paintings that were huge on the side. And I began to weep. And all I could think of, and I want you to realize this because it was such a powerful experience, all I could think of was, I am walking up these stairs for only two reasons: because of the dedication and sacrifices of my parents and my teachers. I am the sum of what they gave me. And I want you who are part of this audience to realize the children we serve are the sum of what we give them. Everything you do matters. And then I will come to my talk, but it is based on gratitude for those teachers and my family who gave this to me. But it is also a matter of gratitude to those scholars with whom I work with. At my center at UCLA, the Center for Dyslexia Diverse Learners, I can't tell you. If I only could give you all the names that I'm grateful to, we would never They never finished. But I am so grateful to them. I'm so grateful to the UCCSU Collaborative on Neuroscience, Diversity, and Learning. I'm grateful to my old Tufts Center for Reading and Language team. And I'm also grateful to a group that none of you know. And I put Janine here because she started us. And of course, Janine might be a slightly bit older than me, so she named it the Peaceniks. And this group of reading colleagues are all doing what I am trying to do with you today, and that is to find the common ground for all of us who are teaching, so that that common ground becomes the most useful thing that we can ever give our children. But I have to go back to this one slide and say something that has to begin everything, and President Bailey said it. Literacy is our platform for our children's development. It is a basic human right. And this basic human right transforms our brain, transforms the lives of our children, transforms the society, and transforms our species. And we who teach have to use the best knowledge we can to ensure that we are truly contributing to our species platform. Only a short part of my talk will be on the digital world, but that I know Maryanne Wolf has some link to the Ezra Klein interview for those of you who want to hear more about that. My talk, however, and this goes straight to the heart of our times. I begin it by quotes from philosophers, poets, and one of my favorite novelists, Marilynne Robinson. And she said, "The greatest test ever made of human wisdom and decency may very well come to this generation and the next, or the next. We must teach and learn broadly and seriously." That's what this conference is about. Learning how to teach in ways that go even beyond what we learned in our classes, in our universities. It is the case that I may step on a few toes. Not to worry. I will step on everybody's toes a little bit, because that's the essence of disequilibrium. I am thrilled. I was even reading some of the notes from some of my Peacenik colleagues who were listening to the talks this morning. And in truth, I should have given my keynote before the rest of the day, but it was too early for me, and I'm a grouch at 6 a.m. But this talk is really about why all those other talks are important. We need to learn ever more. We need to learn not just what we have been taught, but if we're going to do our best by every child, we need to expand that knowledge. Everybody, including people who already believe in what is sometimes euphemistically called the science of reading. But from my standpoint, it's the evolving, ever dynamic study of the reading brain and dyslexia, so that we know if this impediment goes wrong in one instance of our diverse learners, it can go wrong in subtle ways or different ways in all our children. So my perspective from the cognitive neuroscience is that our research on the reading brain helps all children. Now, it is a particular perspective, to be sure, and it will not be the same perspective some of you have. I use one of my favorite, very ancient writers, Marcus Aurelius, to begin. Blame no one, but set the record straight. That's what I think this moment in time in the field of reading is all about. No blame, but We all have something more to learn. And so for me, part of the way in is to talk about the reading brain circuit. And who is the best person to introduce it? Aha, you wouldn't have guessed this. And she wouldn't have either. It's Emily Dickinson. One of my favorite quotes is, "Tell all the truth, but tell it slant. Success in circuit lies." And the circuit we're going to be talking about is the reading brain circuit. And my colleague Stanislas Dehaene has said this always better than most people. He said, parents and educators must have a better understanding of what reading changes in a child's brain. I'm convinced that increased knowledge of these circuits will greatly simplify the teacher's task. And that's my task, to help you in 40 minutes to want to know more about the reading brain, because it is the basis, I believe, of our better understanding of how reading develops, how we should use screeners and assessments, and how we should use that information to tailor and make better instruction based on the characteristics of the child. But this reading brain circuit never existed. There's no genetic program for a reading brain circuit. The reading brain's beautiful design principle is that we can connect our older parts to learn something new. I love that principle. Just think about it. Connect our older parts to learn something new. It's one of the most hopeful aspects of human development and brain development. But there's a catch. And the catch is this. It's a good catch, and it's sort of like Achilles' strength and Achilles' heel. The circuit connects these older parts, but because it didn't exist, it's plastic. And that plasticity means it's going to be very both susceptible and also responsive to environmental influences, like the writing system. Just take a quick look and you'll see that that beautiful Chinese reading brain has a lot more visual cortex in the back and those occipital areas that you see right in front of you. That's very different. But if you have 5,000 characters that you have to learn by 5th grade, you need more real estate in those visual areas. That's just one tiny example. A larger example is our educational methods. When I say that what you do matters, I could not be more serious. How we teach that brain influences how it works. And for some children, how we teach is all wrong. And for many children, almost anything we do will work. My mentor, Jean Chaw at Harvard Reading Lab, said 60%, 50%, no matter what you do. 40% need us. They need us. And that's part of what we talk about in terms of the importance of our educational methods, if you will, what we give our children, what we emphasize. And finally, the medium. Even though I can only talk a little bit, the medium is reflected in how the brain functions. Now, I want to give you a few minutes about reading development and the reality that this development is not just 2 stories or thousands of stories, but there are 2 main stories based on equity. Each new reader between 0 and 5 has to have the parts of that reading brain developing. That's what goes into the circuit. We, the teachers, help connect the circuit, and connect will be the leitmotif of this talk. But each new reader has to make a new reading circuit using the parts it's developing. And that's where it's so important that we have background knowledge being given to our children. I know Keith Stanovich said this about vocabulary, the Matthew effect, the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. That refers not only to language, how impoverished, Louisa Cook-Motes always talk about the impoverished language development. We need to be sure, whether we're working with pediatricians like Roar, Reach Out and Read, or we're working on campaigns like at the Atlanta Speech School, we need to know that our parents need to read to our children and develop that background knowledge, develop that language. And I use the term possum in different ways. In this sense, I want you to know I don't put the U yet, I'll put the U later, but we are working on all of those parts, those components of language and thought when we are in this pre-reading period. It's not just at 5 that we are beginning. The parts of the circuit are developing well before that. I know you had a talk this morning on some of these areas, and most of you are very aware of the importance of phonemes, these smallest units of sounds. And there's so much that we can say about this, but at a minimum, we need our children to represent the phonemes of the language they're going to read. And our multilingual learners are coming with sometimes different phonemes. And it's really incumbent on us to understand that the alphabetic principle is based on putting those phonemes with our orthographic patterns, our letter patterns. And so we really are talking about developing an awareness of what those letters are without forcing or doing anything too early. No. We're developing the parts. And semantic development is found in every story, every book. And I want every parent to understand that even in infancy, they are hearing the sounds of whatever that first language is. They're learning concepts about books. They're learning so much about words. And this old slide I keep showing because the gap in language continues to exist, and we must work in our communities and in campaigns so we don't have our children, and this is in their first language or their first and their second language. We need those words connected to concepts because they make representations. And every night we can, if I can make every parent, every country read to their child, and this is so hard in our troubled world right now, we need to understand that that parent or that caretaker, when they are reading to our children, they are activating not only the receptive language areas, but also the expressive. And when we're reading stories, whether they are 3-year-olds, 5-year-olds, or 10-year-olds, we are developing empathy. We're developing emotional and social development. I can't emphasize this enough, and I will in a few minutes talk about deep reading, but every story introduces children to the thoughts and feelings of others. Now, if we put possum together, and I've left out orthography and morphology and syntax, I only wish I had time for you to really think about that. But I just want you to know that all of those parts, phonology, orthography, semantics, syntax, morphology, all of that's developing. And if you look at the first 5 slides, they are developing, not connected to each other yet, but they are developing to make the first aspects of the reading brain. Now, our job is to connect those parts. And here is a slide that I wish I could just give all of you, because this is the possum that I want you to realize, that everything we do in our teaching is about connecting all of these parts. That U is conceptual, understanding the alphabetic principle. But to do that, we need those phonemes. We need an awareness of letters. We need an awareness of the correspondence between them. Please understand, those of you who come from a slightly different perspective on this, that one of the things that we are doing is making the connections between the sounds and the letters, and we're making representations in the brain. The worst two words I ever have heard in our field is kill and drill. Forget that. We are doing is making representations of those areas and their connectivity. But we're not just talking about phoneme awareness and phonics. An evolving understanding of the science of the reading brain is always connecting it to our knowledge of words, the semantics, the syntax, how words work, how morphemes, these tiniest units of meaning, change the way words work. We are talking, and this is going to be for some of you an epiphany, for some of you a very hard thing to think about, but please realize that what we really know in that reading brain is how all of these areas are connected, and that our job is to make this explicit, systematic, structured, no cherry picking, so that what we are learning how to do is bringing the parts together so they get fluent, so they get automatic at the word level, but never without the sentence or the text as part of what the process is. Now, I'm going to come back to that, but I need you to realize that getting that connected and getting it automatic helps us move the circuit into the elaborated circuit of the deep reading brain. Now, how does it happen? This is going to be, I hope, fun for you. That's why I'm in California, so I can be sleeveless, but I had to be sleeveless for this moment. I'm developing a brief that's called elbow room, and it's a polysemous word. It's an elbow room with a physical aspect that I want to tell you about, but it's also about the elbow room, that there is room for all of us in this, if you will, dynamic developmental sequence. That is how the decoding and expanded foundational skills and comprehension work together. So elbow up, these are the possum. These are the foundational skills, but never are they not being applied, even in two-word decodable sentences, to stories. And when I say science meets story, that's the subtitle of my own program, because we aren't talking about this in isolation. We're talking about it in its beginning application. But as this becomes automatic, now watch this. And Maureen Lovett, my dear colleague, helped me figure this sequence out a long time ago, though she doesn't use her elbows. But I need you to realize that what happens is that as this becomes automatic, it begins to underlie the development of ever more sophisticated comprehension processes. So the developmental sequence goes like this. And there are all kinds of factors that influence it in the individual characteristics and the language variation of our children and their cultural heritage and background. All these things influence it. But this is the sequence that I want all of you to realize underlies deep reading, which is what is the goal that connects us. What connects everyone who's listening here is our goal to make our children have a reading home, a sanctuary, a place where they can have their best thoughts, as Proust said, when he was asked, what is the heart of reading? He said, it is when we go beyond the wisdom of the author to discover our own. You and I are after that, if you will, process of going beyond the wisdom to discover our own thoughts. But there are different processes. And so when you talk about comprehension, I want to break that down. That's part of my work in terms of deep reading. We're talking about background knowledge, bringing that 0 to 5 period, but always developing it. And my dear friend Alberto Mangel said this: reading is cumulative and proceeds with geometric progression. Each new reading builds upon what the reader has read before. Everything we do is cumulative. One, however, of the most important aspects of reading, and President Bailey and Mary referred to this, is the empathy it gives us, the ability to take on the perspective of other. I learned so much from my theologian teacher, John Donne. And what he said was, it is the capacity to pass over to others and come back to ourselves that is so important in reading, and he was a theologian, and in life. So what we are doing when we are teaching our children these deep reading skills, we are helping them make analogies with what they know, bringing it to bear to the text, and then going somewhere new. And our cognitive neuroscientists are saying rightly that a novel is like learning a piece of consciousness of other from one mind to the other. But the novelist Junot Diaz said it best. The novel is the closest to telepathy we can come to. We are giving our children a chance to understand how others think and feel. Nothing could be more important in this moment in which we absolutely must pray for every human being on this earth. But now I want to come to what I consider the penultimate, not ultimate, the penultimate aspect of reading. And that's when we put together inference, analogy, background knowledge, empathy, perspective taking, and we make what I call the frontal lobe dance. This is when we make critical analysis happen in our brains. We're putting together, we're connecting. Again, think the word connect. Connect what we know to what the text is. Make an inference. Make hypotheses. And this is what your right and left frontal cortex are always doing when we're really in critical analysis. We're almost in a dance. Is this true? Don't think so. Here's another hypothesis, going back and forth before the imprimatur of our ability to evaluate the truth of something happens. And in this moment in time, we are victims of the short circuiting of both empathy and critical analysis. Our misinformation, our disinformation is attacking truth. And our antidote, your job and mine, is to insist that our children, our youth, ourselves use our highest forms, our most disciplined thinking, so that we can come to the ultimate part of reading, which is the contemplative. What do we think for ourselves, that Proustian concept? And I used Thomas Aquinas here because he said, we must hand on to others the things gained in contemplation. The ultimate act of deep reading is to discover our own wisdom. And that is not what is happening in so many ways, in part influenced by our culture, in part influenced by our media, but in part influenced because we need to teach it better and better. Now, I'm going to summarize the first part of this talk and then move forward. But I need to summarize it in a way that can be quick. I only wish I had time to go through all these implications, but I will insist that you know a phrase from each of the important 7 implications. First, we need to be sure to be developing the parts of the circuit 0 to 5. Second, with my colleagues at UCSF and our UCCSU collaborative, we are making sure that every child, and there was a bill passed by our governor, is screened, not diagnosed, screened for the strengths and weaknesses that that child brings to bear. It's never, and this is really important for our multilingual learners, it's never about putting children in special education because they are, quote, at risk. This is not a diagnosis. This is a set of data we want to use for number 3, which is to connect it to our knowledge about the child's characteristics, their cultural background, their linguistic variation, all of that. We connect it. And then 4, we use it with explicit, this is where I will insist, we need to be explicit about connecting the parts of those expanded foundational skills, all of them. Whether we're talking about phonics and phoneme awareness, we're connecting it to vocabulary, to semantics. We're talking about connecting semantics to syntax, how words are formed. We're connecting all of that to morphology, how those smallest units of meaning change, and how all of it is connected to text and text reading. Number 5, we need to be sure we're following each child, monitoring them in linguistic ways, in social cultural ways, and using various kinds of models like MTSS, but those that will help us understand where a child is now and where they need to be next. They are not to be arrested. They are to be monitored. And finally, we need to have all this information in the hands of our teachers who are 4th grade and on, because they never expected to have to teach reading. And yet, that is not just COVID, that is our society. So many of our children are not fluent by 4th grade. You know the statistics from NAEP, how only a small percentage of our children are reaching proficiency in 4th and 8th grade. This is unconscionable. And our children of color are not even reaching basic level often by 4th grade. We must work to make our children automatic fluent by 4th grade, and our 4th grade teachers on need more information and more support. Now, part of the way we support them is to give knowledge about the diversity of how the brain organized itself. Now, 50,000 years ago, we had this brain. Literacy was only 6,000 years ago. So what does that mean about dyslexia? It means that that's a different brain organization that is testimony to the way the species needs different organizations. Look at this painting behind you and look at the bottom name of that list, Ben Wolf Noam. My dyslexic son is a absolutely wonderful artist. Now, not all of our children with dyslexia have architects or entrepreneurs or inventors, but many of them are, and we must never lose them. Our research, and that's with Robin Morris in Atlanta and Maureen Lovett, my colleague in Canada, we've been doing this research on what interventions are most helpful. And there's only 3 things I'm going to show you. But we did this thanks to Reedline and NICHD. We did what are called randomized controlled treatment studies. Oh my God, the gold standard that drive you crazy. But these evidence-based programs, that's what I want you to be thinking about when you are using your various methods. Science helps us figure out what works, not just in one place by one publisher, but in a peer review objective way. This is so important to us. And I'm working actually with Tim Odegaard, who's our editor of Annals of Dyslexia, to help present views of science of reading that are evolving. And that's really what we want. But I have 3 slides to show you about what I think is most important from our intervention studies. First, early. We can intervene later, but the earlier we get, and that's why screening is so important, the earlier we get in, the better our results. And this is work with Maureen Lovett and Robin Morris. And the other very important thing is that when we were trying to figure out what works best, if you look at the bottom, you'll see that, programs that are good classroom programs but just, business as usual, are never as effective as when you do what we call multi-component intervention. And you can read about this. We used the RAVO program and the Empower program, but the point of both of them is that we are putting PASN together. We are making sure that all of these components are there. One, because that is the reading brain, but two, it addresses the heterogeneity of our children with dyslexia. There's not just one form, and multi-component gives us a better shot at addressing and emphasizing certain parts that match the needs of our different children. And there are so many different ones. And this final third slide is on intervention, is that, and this was actually my colleague Daniela Traficante in Milano. She actually translated our program and showed a multi-component program and showed that it was developing these social emotional characteristics of our kids, that their relationships were better, their optimism, their sense of well-being. We must never not think that these interventions for children with dyslexia don't have principles that are usable for us all, because the goal for every reader is deep reading, but it isn't a given. It is never a given. To make a deep reading brain requires years. It also, when it's developed, requires milliseconds, extra milliseconds for all those more sophisticated processes. And that's where we come to a few slides about what is my worry about the digital reading brain. And know that I am by no means at all opposed to the use of digital, but the wise use. I'm not talking about binaries, but my colleague Sherry Turkle said it best. We transgress not because we try to innovate the new, but because we do not ask ourselves what it disrupts or diminishes. And I've been working with a lot of different people on this, but know that the reading circuit reflects the medium. And when your medium, the digital medium, is constantly pushing you, hastening you along, what can happen is that you short circuit the deep reading processes that require all those milliseconds. And Patricia Greenfield, my colleague at UCLA, said each medium has its costs and weaknesses, but the cost in digital seems to be deep processing. The reason is time. We are basically skimmers. The skimming is the new normal. And what we need to know is that new normal can, if we are not asking the purpose of our reading and really thinking about it, we can use less time just to get it done. And then we have less memory, it's less consolidated memory, less use of empathy, more susceptibility. Now, I'll only show you one little slide or two about this, just so that you know what I'm talking about. The kids in the what was called the e-read study, this big meta-analysis, they were, I shouldn't say kids, they were young adults, and they were just asked to read one thing, like a little novella in print versus screen, and then be tested in comprehension. The better results were for print. And then you ask, well, what about the digital natives, the end, well, this is 171,000. What about that subset that are real digital natives, just the most recent? Print was even better. And why? My colleague Ackerman from Israel had said this. They perceive themselves better on the screen because they're faster. That's how they think. We need to understand that we are not going to progress if we are beginning to atrophy critical analysis and empathy. And we who are teachers, we need to insist upon teaching these deep reading processes. Otherwise, We're going to be giving less attention to other perspectives as a society. We're going to be more susceptible just to going to our familiar silos of information that simply confirm our biases. We need critical, empathic minds to fight false information, which leads to demagoguery, because any demagogue can just say the same thing over and over again, and repetition is a piece of what's going on. That destroys critical analysis at its best. That threatens a democracy. Your work and mine are essential. We are game changers for democracy. Now, these lessons that I've been, and I'm going to end in the next couple of slides, these lessons, however, have a really important aspect. As I said, there's no binary. But what we need to do is preserve this reading brain as we expand it. And I use a Vygotskian-like parallel. Those of you who remember Vygotsky, is so wonderful. But just as he had language and thought coming parallel and coming together, I want everybody to learn through print, especially in the first 10 years, while they simultaneously learn coding and programming and using this, especially for children with dyslexia. They can use it to make things automatic. There's all kinds of good uses of it. But the development of deep reading should be happening, I believe, and this is my perspective. I believe it should happen with print largely complemented by the digital, but not exclusively so. As the Ezra Klein interview, for those of you who want to hear more. Now, we have a crisis. I was invited here because, in part, we have a crisis in our own field. Where do we go from here? Well, the popes used a poem to help us, and I think it's really appropriate that I end my last couple slides here. Where the danger is also grows the saving power. That's the genius in the human story. There's always a way to escape destruction. Where humankind has to act is precisely there in the threat itself. That is where the door opens. I think the threat in the reading field is this unnatural, unfortunate, unnecessary tension between methods when there's so much common ground. If we truly come to understand what the reading brain has to tell us, it's agnostic, but it's informative. What it really shows, I believe, in our intervention work and in our work in more prediction, is that explicit systematic instruction in an expanded foundational skills, always connected to text, but over time connected in an underlying way, over time, to have deep reading for texts and stories as we progress as the dominant aspect. It's a developmental picture that goes back to my first conviction in my dissertation. The more you know about words, the faster and better you will comprehend. I'm going to end with a quote. I have never done this before from myself, because it's so important that I give you at least one sentence. I read both to find fresh reason to love this world and to leave this world behind, to enter a space where I can glimpse what lies beyond my imagination, outside my knowledge and my experience of life, to expand an ever truer, more beautiful understanding of a universe with God's footprints everywhere, and to lead a life based on this vision for my students and those who will follow. You and I have a charge. Amanda Gorman, the poet at the inauguration, said it. For while we have our eyes on the future, history has its eyes on us. Go for it. As E.M. Forster said, only connect.